In the golden halls of the great palace of Constantinople, where Byzantine emperors ruled over the remnants of Rome's glory, the most shocking act of maternal betrayal in history was about to unfold. This is the story of Empress Irene of Athens, a woman who seized power through manipulation, maintained it through murder, and ultimately committed an act so monstrous that it horrified even the violence-hardened Byzantine court. On July 15, 797 AD, in a palace chamber lit only by flickering candles, a mother ordered the brutal blinding of her own son, not in a moment of rage, not in self-defense, but as a calculated political move designed to secure her grip on absolute power. Welcome to the Byzantine Empire, at its most depraved, where family meant nothing, where maternal love was weakness, and where the throne was worth any price, even the destruction of one's own flesh and blood. To understand how Irene became capable of such monstrous acts, we must begin with her origins in 8th century Athens, a city that was no longer the intellectual center of the ancient world, but a provincial backwater, struggling under Byzantine rule. Irene was born around 752 AD into a world where survival meant understanding power, where young women learned that their value lay not in their humanity, but in their ability to serve political purposes. Orphaned at a young age, she was raised by relatives who understood that her beauty and intelligence were assets to be carefully cultivated and strategically deployed. But there was something different about Irene from the beginning. While other young women of her social class learned to be modest and submissive, Irene studied the mechanics of influence. She watched how power flowed through Byzantine society, how alliances were formed and broken, how weakness was exploited and strength rewarded. By the time she reached marriageable age, Irene had developed skills that would serve her throughout her life: the ability to read people's deepest desires and fears, the talent for making herself indispensable to those who could advance her position, and most crucially, the capacity to hide her true nature behind a mask of perfect feminine virtue. In 1769 AD, when Irene was just 17, she was selected to marry Leo IV, heir to the Byzantine throne. This wasn't a love match. It was a political calculation designed to strengthen ties between Constantinople and the Greek-speaking provinces. But from the moment she entered the Great Palace, Irene began implementing a strategy that would take decades to fully unfold. She positioned herself not just as Leo's wife, but as his closest advisor, the one person who truly understood his needs and fears. Leo IV was a complex man, intelligent but neurotic, powerful but insecure, devoted to his mother but desperate to prove his independence. Irene studied these contradictions like a scholar studying ancient texts, learning exactly how to manipulate each aspect of his personality to serve her growing ambitions. Within months of their marriage, courtiers began to notice something strange. The new princess seemed to wield influence far beyond what was normal for an imperial wife. She attended meetings traditionally closed to women, offered opinions on matters of state, and gradually became the filter through which others accessed the future emperor. In 771 AD, Irene gave birth to a son, Constantine VI. For most mothers, this would have been the moment of greatest joy, the arrival of a healthy child who would carry on the family line. For Irene, it was something far more calculating, the birth of the ultimate political asset. From Constantine's earliest days, Irene approached motherhood like a chess master planning moves years in advance. This child wasn't just her son, he was her pathway to absolute power, the vessel through which she could rule an empire that would never accept a woman as its sole sovereign. But even in those early years, there were signs of the darkness that would eventually consume their relationship. Irene's affection for Constantine was conditional, performance-based, tied to how well he served her broader political goals. When he pleased her, she showered him with attention. When he disappointed her, she withdrew her love with a coldness that shocked even Byzantine courtiers accustomed to political calculation. Jealous servants later recalled moments that revealed Irene's true nature. how she would test the young prince's loyalty by putting him in situations where he had to choose between his own desires and her approval, how she would punish minor infractions with isolation techniques that left the child desperate for her attention. The Byzantine Empire of Irene's time was torn apart by one of the most vicious religious controversies in Christian history, the iconoclastic crisis. This wasn't just a theological debate. It was a struggle for the soul of Byzantine civilization that would provide Irene with the perfect cover for her political machinations. Emperor Leo III, Irene's father-in-law, had banned the veneration of religious icons, declaring them idolatrous and ordering their destruction throughout the empire. This policy, continued by Leo IV, created deep divisions within Byzantine society that Irene learned to exploit with masterful skill. She positioned herself as a secret supporter of icon veneration, while publicly supporting her husband's iconoclastic policies. This double game allowed her to build networks of support among icon-venerating monks, nobles, and commoners, while maintaining her position within the iconoclastic imperial court. But Irene's involvement in the iconoclastic controversy wasn't driven by religious conviction. It was driven by political opportunism. She recognized that religious passion could be weaponized, that theological arguments could mask political ambitions, and that presenting herself as a defender of traditional faith could legitimize her unprecedented grab for power. In September 780 AD, Emperor Leo IV died suddenly at the age of just 30. The official cause was fever, but whispers immediately began circulating through the palace corridors about the convenient timing of his death. Irene, now 28 years old, had become regent for her 9-year-old son Constantine VI, exactly the position she needed to begin implementing her long-term plans. The circumstances of Leo's death remain suspicious to this day, and he had been in good health, showed no signs of serious illness, and died just as political tensions within the empire were reaching a critical point. Some contemporary sources hint at poisoning. Others suggest that Irene simply allowed a treatable illness to run its course by dismissing physicians who might have saved him. What we know for certain is Irene's reaction to her husband's death. She showed no genuine grief, immediately took control of imperial administration, and began making changes that revealed she had been planning for this moment for years. Within days of Leo's funeral, she was issuing decrees, making appointments, and positioning herself as the real power behind the child emperor's throne. As regent, Irene faced immediate challenges from Leo's brothers and other male relatives who believed they had stronger claims to imperial power than a foreign-born. Her response revealed the sophisticated understanding of Byzantine politics she had developed during her years of careful observation. She didn't fight these challenges directly. That would have been too obvious, too crude. Instead, she systematically undermined her opponents through a combination of bribery, blackmail, and strategic elimination that left no clear evidence of her involvement. One by one, Leo's brothers found themselves facing manufactured scandals, false accusations, or mysterious accidents that removed them from the political scene. Those who survived learned that opposing the regent was dangerous to their health, their wealth, and their family's safety. But Irene's most brilliant stroke was how she managed her relationship with her young son during this period. She presented herself to the court and the people as the devoted mother protecting her child's inheritance from grasping relatives. She made Constantine visible at public ceremonies while ensuring he had no real power, creating the illusion of legitimate rule while maintaining total control. In 1787 AD, Irene made her boldest political move yet. She reversed imperial policy on icon veneration, calling the Second Council of Nicaea to restore the use of religious images throughout the empire. This wasn't just a religious decision, it was a masterstroke of political theater that served multiple purposes simultaneously. By positioning herself as the pious empress who had restored true faith to Byzantium, Irene gained the fervent support of monks, the common people, and icon-venerating nobles who had been suppressed under previous iconoclastic emperors. She transformed herself from a foreign usurper into a divinely blessed defender of Orthodox Christianity. But the iconoclastic reversal also served a more sinister purpose. It allowed Irene to eliminate remaining opponents under the cover of religious purification. Iconoclastic officials found themselves accused of heresy, their properties confiscated, their careers destroyed, their families persecuted. The young Constantine VI was present at the council, lending his imperial authority to his mother's decisions while having no real understanding of their implications. Irene was teaching him that imperial power meant the ability to reshape reality itself, to declare what was true and false, sacred and profane, legal and illegal. As Constantine approached his 18th birthday in 789 AD, the fiction of Irene's regency was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Byzantine law and custom demanded that the young emperor assume full power, take a wife, and begin ruling in his own right. But Irene had no intention of surrendering the power she had spent nearly a decade accumulating. She had tasted absolute authority and found it intoxicating. The idea of stepping aside to become a dowager empress, dependent on her son's goodwill for her position and safety, was unbearable. So she began implementing a strategy designed to keep Constantine dependent on her indefinitely. She controlled his education, ensuring he learned only what she wanted him to know. She managed his social relationships, preventing him from forming close bonds with anyone who might influence him against her interests. Most crucially, she began a systematic campaign to undermine his confidence and independence. Constantine was isolated from potential allies, surrounded by his mother's agents, and subjected to constant psychological pressure designed to convince him that he was unfit to rule without her guidance. This wasn't motherly concern, it was systematic emotional abuse designed to maintain political control. In 788 AD, Irene arranged Constantine's marriage to Maria of Amnia, a young woman from an Armenian noble family. But this wasn't a normal imperial wedding designed to produce heirs and strengthen alliances. It was another tool in Irene's campaign to control her son's life. Maria wasn't chosen for her beauty, intelligence, or political connections. She was chosen because Irene believed she could be controlled, that her loyalty could be purchased, and that she would serve as another pair of eyes and ears monitoring Constantine's every move. The wedding ceremony was magnificent, a display of imperial power that reinforced Constantine's position as emperor, while ensuring that everyone understood who really held authority. Irene stage-managed every aspect of the celebration, from the guest list to the ceremonial protocols, making it clear that even Constantine's most personal relationships existed at her discretion. But the marriage also marked the beginning of a new phase in the relationship between mother and son. Constantine was no longer a child who could be openly controlled. He was becoming a man who was starting to question his mother's dominance and imagine what independent rule might look like. By 790 AD, Constantine was 19 years old and increasingly frustrated with his mother's refusal to allow him real power. Encouraged by a small group of young nobles who saw opportunity in supporting the legitimate emperor against his domineering mother, Constantine began planning his first attempt at independence. The plot was discovered almost immediately. Irene's network of informants had penetrated every level of the imperial court, and Constantine's youthful inexperience made him easy to monitor. But Irene's response to her son's rebellion revealed the true cabinet was much needed for support. She didn't just punish Constantine, she systematically destroyed everyone who had supported him. His co-conspirators were arrested, tortured, and executed or exiled. Their families were persecuted, their properties confiscated, their names erased from official records. Constantine himself was subjected to public humiliation, designed to demonstrate his weakness and reinforce his dependence on his mother's protection. He was forced to watch the punishments inflicted on his supporters, to acknowledge his mistakes publicly, and to beg forgiveness from the woman who had given him life. Following Constantine's failed rebellion, Irene intensified her psychological campaign against her son. This wasn't just political control, it was systematic emotional torture designed to break his spirit and eliminate any possibility of future resistance. Constantine found himself under constant surveillance. His every word reported to his mother, his every relationship scrutinized for signs of disloyalty. He was surrounded by his mother's agents, who posed as friends while monitoring his activities and reporting his private conversations. But perhaps most devastating was Irene's manipulation of Constantine's marriage. She systematically undermined his relationship with Maria, spreading rumors about his wife's fidelity, encouraging conflicts between the young couple, and ensuring that Constantine's most intimate relationship became another source of stress and insecurity. The young emperor began showing signs of severe psychological distress, mood swings, paranoia, difficulty making decisions, and an increasing dependence on his mother's approval for his sense of self-worth. Irene had successfully turned motherhood into a weapon of psychological destruction. In 1797 AD, Constantine made one final desperate attempt to claim his rightful position as sole emperor. Now 26 years old and supported by a faction of military officers who were disturbed by Irene's unprecedented power, he moved to arrest his mother and her closest supporters. For a brief moment, it seemed the coup might succeed. Constantine had learned from his previous failure and had built a broader base of support among elements of the army and bureaucracy who believed that Byzantine tradition demanded male imperial rule. But Irene had spent 17 years preparing for exactly this scenario. Her counter-coup was swift, brutal, and decisive. Constantine's supporters were overwhelmed by forces loyal to the Empress, their leaders captured or killed, their rebellion crushed within hours. This time, however, Irene faced a problem she had never confronted before: what to do with a son who had repeatedly demonstrated that he would never accept her dominance, who would continue to represent a threat to her power as long as he lived, but whose death would make her position as sole ruler legally impossible. A solution would shock the Byzantine Empire and horrify the medieval world. On the morning of August 15th, 797 AD, Empress Irene made a decision that would define her legacy for over 1,000 years. She ordered the blinding of her own son, Constantine VI. This wasn't a moment of rage or temporary insanity. It was a calculated political decision designed to eliminate Constantine as a threat, while keeping him alive to legitimize her rule. In Byzantine law and custom, a blind man could not serve as emperor. Physical perfection was considered essential for imperial rule. By blinding Constantine, Irene would remove him as a political threat, while avoiding the obvious succession problems that would arise from his death. But the method she chose revealed the true depths of her cruelty. Constantine wasn't to be quickly blinded with a sword or dagger. He was to be slowly tortured with heated irons applied directly to his eyes, ensuring maximum pain and leaving him permanently disfigured as a living reminder of what happened to those who opposed the Empress. The blinding took place in the Purple Chamber of the Great Palace, the same room where Constantine had been born 26 years earlier. Irene chose this location deliberately. It was a symbolic act designed to demonstrate that she was destroying what she had created, that maternal bonds meant nothing when they conflicted with political necessity. Contemporary accounts describe Constantine being brought into the chamber by guards loyal to his mother, still believing he might be able to negotiate his way out of the situation. He reportedly called out to Irene, addressing her as mother and begging for mercy, appealing to whatever maternal feelings might still exist within her. Irene's response was to order the torturers to begin their work while she watched from a throne, positioned to give her a clear view of her son's suffering. She didn't just order Constantine's blinding, she supervised it personally, ensuring it was carried out to her exact specifications. The process was deliberately prolonged, designed to inflict maximum psychological as well as physical trauma. Constantine's screams reportedly echoed through the palace corridors, audible to courtiers who were horrified by what their empress was capable of inflicting on her own flesh and blood. News of Constantine's blinding spread through Constantinople like wildfire. creating a crisis of legitimacy that threatened to tear the Byzantine Empire apart. Even by the violent standards of Byzantine politics, a mother's deliberate torture of her son was unprecedented and shocking. Many courtiers who had supported Irene's regency found themselves unable to accept what she had done. Some fled the capital, others withdrew from public life. Still others began quietly organizing opposition to an empress who had demonstrated that no relationship, no bond, no human connection could limit her pursuit of power. The common people of Constantinople were equally horrified. While they had accepted Irene's religious policies and even supported her against iconoclastic opponents, the blinding of Constantine crossed a line that challenged basic assumptions about maternal nature and Christian morality. But Irene seemed oblivious to the shock and disgust her actions had generated. She continued to govern as if nothing had happened, issuing decrees, meeting with foreign ambassadors, and conducting state business, while her blind, broken son remained imprisoned in the palace, a living testament to her monstrosity. For 5 years, from 797 to 802 AD, Irene ruled as the sole emperor of Byzantium, the first woman in Roman history to hold supreme imperial power in her own right. But her reign was characterized by increasing isolation, paranoia, and instability that reflected the psychological cost of her ultimate crime. Irene found herself surrounded by people who feared her rather than respected her, who obeyed her orders while secretly planning her downfall. The blinding of Constantine had demonstrated that she was capable of anything, but it had also revealed a fundamental flaw in her character that made her unfit for long-term rule. She became increasingly erratic in her decision-making, alternating between periods of manic activity and deep depression. Some historians suggest she was haunted by what she had done to Constantine, though she never publicly expressed remorse or acknowledged that her actions had been wrong. The empire itself began to suffer under her rule. Military commanders were reluctant to serve an empress who might turn on them without warning. Diplomats found it increasingly difficult to negotiate with foreign powers, who saw Irene as an illegitimate usurper. The careful political coalition she had built over decades began to crumble under the weight of her ultimate crime. In 802 AD, a palace coup led by the finance minister Nikephoros finally removed Irene from power. The conspiracy succeeded not because it was particularly well planned or well executed, but because virtually no one was willing to fight for an empress who had proven herself capable of torturing her own child. Irene was exiled to the island of Lesbos, where she died in obscurity the following year. Her death passed almost unnoticed. The woman who had once ruled the greatest empire in the world was forgotten by subjects who were eager to move beyond the horror of her reign. Constantine VI survived his mother's torture by only a few years. Blind, broken, and imprisoned, he died in 1805 AD, possibly from suicide, though the exact circumstances remain unclear. His death finally ended the tragic story that had begun with a mother's ambition and ended with a son's destruction. Empress Irene's story serves as perhaps history's most extreme example of how the pursuit of absolute power can corrupt even the most fundamental human relationships. Her willingness to torture her own son for political advantage reveals depths of moral depravity that challenge our understanding of maternal nature and human psychology. But Irene's crimes also demonstrate the dangers of unchecked authority in any form. Her rise to power was enabled by a political system that concentrated too much authority in too few hands, that provided no meaningful checks on imperial behavior, and that allowed personal ambition to override moral constraints. The Byzantine Empire survived Irene's reign, but it was permanently scarred by her example. Future emperors and empresses would remember what she had done and understand that there are no limits to what those in power might do to maintain their position. Her story reminds us that the capacity for monstrous behavior exists in all human beings, that the bonds we consider most sacred, between parent and child, between mother and son, can be destroyed by the corrupting influence of absolute power. It warns us that when we create systems that place individuals above moral accountability, we enable horrors that would be unthinkable in normal human relationships. Empress Irene died over 1200 years ago, but her legacy continues to haunt us. She proved that a mother's love is not unconditional, that political ambition can overcome biological instinct, and that the pursuit of power can transform anyone, even a mother, into a monster, capable of destroying what they claim to love most.